The kingdom of Getica is a prosperous realm, renowned for its lush forests, beautiful farmland, and awe-inspiring mountains. Citizens of the kingdom live happy lives, grateful that the last war with the Ventian Empire is over and they are once again at peace with their neighbors. But there is still a war, one that most citizens know nothing about. Unseen, unknown, and unremembered, mysterious entities known as Frights cause terror throughout the kingdom. They appear in a variety of forms, but it's their effect on memory that may be their most dangerous power. After adolescence, people forget about the existence of Frights, and even remember their childhood experiences differently. But the kingdom is not without protectors. Brave children known as the Guardians of Getica battle to keep the Frights at bay. And they aren't alone. As citizens reach their elder years, their memories of the Frights return. And as they begin to remember, many former Guardians return to serve as mentors to their younger counterparts. Then both young and old take up the mission, protect the realm from the Frights, and train the next generation of Guardians. Huh? Welcome to Geek Philosophy, where we love geeky wisdom. If you're new to the channel, my name is Brian, and we release new videos weekly, so please consider subscribing and turning on the notifications so you don't miss out on any of the content. And all that stuff really helps the channel, so we appreciate it. I've been dropping a few hints that this was coming in the past, but I'm finally going to introduce you to this kid-friendly subsetting that I'm developing for my own table, and you'll be able to use it for yours. This tabletop role-playing game project is particularly suited for kids, but it works for older players as well. I think it'll work for almost any fantasy campaign, and my goal is to make it system agnostic, so it won't matter what version of D&D or any other fantasy RPG you are playing. Let me tell you a little bit more about it. As many of you know by now, I love D&D, and I've been playing since I was about 11 or 12 years old. I had a really good friend at the time who introduced me to D&D, and I started playing in a game with him and his sister and his stepfather, who was running the game and was my first DM. We played on weekends or even sometimes after walking home from school. It was a blast, and we had a ton of adventures right there at their kitchen table. Later, when my family moved to a different state, I started running a game for my new friends that I found at my new school. We were all middle school or junior high school students, and we had a lot of fun playing for years to come. Enough years that we've been playing off and on since then. You see the beard, so figure it out. Long time. Later on, when I became a stepdad, I ran some games for my own kids. First for my oldest, and then years later for my youngest. And in a lot of ways, it was a continuation of the same homebrew campaign worlds and characters that my friends and I created when we were kids. But I often had to adjust things a little bit so that they were more age appropriate, which is fine. But it made me feel like I was ignoring the rest of the campaign world when I toned things down. It was like a mismatch of styles in the same setting, and it didn't seem to mesh for me. I wanted a way to let the younger kids play without compromising any of the other cool stuff created for teens and adults that was happening in that same world. I absolutely do not think everything has to be kid-friendly, let me just say that. Being suitable for children should not be the litmus test for all content in general. I think that's kind of ridiculous. But I do think that there should be content available for kids, and there should be more options for younger kids to play D&D in an age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate way. So that got me thinking, what if there was a way to build a kid-friendly subsetting that could exist along with the regular campaign world? What if there was a way to introduce younger kids to D&D and they could potentially keep their same characters going for years as they grew up when their characters grew up too? This game could span generations in the game and in the real world, as it does for a lot of people. I also realized that sometimes kids hang out with their grandparents and they sort of have little adventures that they go on with them. I mean, I remember doing that when I was a kid. Grandparents start remembering what it was like when they were young and when their kids were young, and they sort of let themselves play again. So I started putting this together within my own campaign world of Ventus. Ventus has its own grown-up problems with scary monsters, intense magic, and political intrigue, and all the stuff that teens and adults might want, but some of those things doesn't really fit for kids and they would lose interest pretty quickly. But there's also an unseen and almost forgotten adventure happening as well. Something unique to the younger kids, something just for them. but also for older adults. I'm not really reinventing the wheel in some of these concepts, and as with a bunch of kid-friendly stories, I'm going to be using a school as a base of operations and a starting point for this sub-campaign world. There's a reason why this trope has worked in a lot of other stories. It's familiar enough for kids to understand, it has a built-in structure, and a natural progression to help the story move along. In my world, it's set in the Kingdom of Getica, at the Royal Academy. The Academy is open to all children and all citizens of the kingdom, although attendance isn't mandatory for everyone. Students are admitted each season to attend classes to promote literacy and language development, mathematics, and to move into other useful trades. If they have the aptitude, they may also receive some martial or magical training, since this is a fantasy world and a role-playing game. Many students live on campus for a season, and then some of those students kind of go to and from home based on farming families needing them to be home during the warmer months, and an academy season begins in the late autumn and ends in the early spring. So it kind of mirrors what we have for our own gaming groups and what's going on with school. However, unknown to most adults in the realm, the Academy also serves as a front for the Guardians of Getica, the mostly unsung heroes of the realm. The Guardians of Getica organization consists of 3 distinct groups: apprentices, guardians, and elders. I'll explain the elders shortly, but let's take a look at the role kids play in the game. Apprentices are those children from Getica that are in their first few years at the Royal Academy. They've started their apprenticeship in the Guardians of Getica organization, and their exact ages would vary based on your campaign world's races and cultures, but I would say that the age range for real humans and the equivalent for us would be around ages 7 to 10. Guardians are the kids who have completed their apprenticeship and are closer to graduating from the Royal Academy. Our human equivalent to that in our world would be around 10 to 15. After the age of 15, and you can adjust these for your world however you like, each Guardian begins to forget things. The reality of what's happening and the mission against the Frights slips away. Even a Guardian's personal experiences battling with the Frights are kind of remembered differently. Now, each of these 3 groups within the Guardians of Getica take the Guardian's pledge. For as long as I can remember, I will spread the message, reconnect with the elders, and protect the realm. So first, let's talk about the message. When I was a kid, I remember hearing about all kinds of things from my grandparents' generation. So there were definitely songs of their era that didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me at the time, likely because it was a different generation or I wasn't old enough to understand all yet, but I liked them, they sounded cool, I sang along. Yeah, songs. But I also remember bedtime stories and even nonsense rhymes and poems and superstitions or traditions that also didn't make much sense. They were just kind of things that people passed on. What if the players could create those things to help spread the message and hide information about what was going on with the Frights? The Guardians help create important folklore that can spread throughout Getica, and that can help keep the Frights away. And it takes the form of poems or songs or stories, and all of those things contain steps to ward against the Frights. They may seem fun or silly creations to share around the campfire or when traveling on the road, but they contain a deeper message intended to protect the realm. And remember, the kids aren't alone. They have elders helping them along the way. The elders are members of Getican society who help guide and train both apprentices and guardians. I'll let you decide what the human equivalent ages should be here. But I would say they should at least be around grandparent age, whatever that means to you. They don't have to be grandparents, by the way, just around whatever that age might be in your world. Elders have spent the majority of their life with no recollection of the struggle against the Frights. They've forgotten it all, but one day, they start to remember the Frights again. Maybe they have a dream that seems a little too real, or maybe they've had their own children or grandchildren, and the memories start coming back as they watch them grow up. Then one day they remember it all. And if they were a previous Guardian of Getica, they remember the Guardian's pledge and the mission. Many of them try to explain things to other adults, but it never works. The younger adults write it off as sort of overactive imagination, or it may even account for that old kooky wizard in the woods who rambles on about things that the other adults can't see. Side note, by the way, this is by no means meant to diminish any real-world mental health conditions. Memory loss, dementia, Alzheimer's, even schizophrenia, these are real, and they're very life-changing conditions for people, so don't let anything go down that route. This is really purely the idea of you start remembering what it's like to be young. That's the inspiration. So stop and course correct if any of your players start taking it down that direction, because it really shouldn't go that way. That said, there is inspiration to show how elders are still important, vital members of society. And I have a ton of great experience and wisdom to share, and that's really what we're trying to connect with here. So the adults playing in the game should take the role of elders, joining along with any apprentices or guardians on these missions that they go on against the Frights to protect the realm. And speaking of protecting the realm, let's face it, any D&D or any other fantasy RPG or RPG in general, the players love combat and magic, especially kids. So I don't want to take any of that away from them, but I want to make sure that we have a way to make it age appropriate. There are 3 effective weapons to use against Frights: ironwood, asteri steel, and magic. The weapons used by the Guardians are either made from ironwood, which grows naturally in the forest surrounding the Guardians' headquarters, or asteri steel. And asteri steel is named for the asteri forge in which it's created, located in the kingdom of Getica, and it also happens to be inside the ironwood forest. Asteri steel is an alloy of iron and a mysterious metal that was discovered in a meteorite that landed in the ironwood forest a long time ago. Doesn't matter how long, just a long time ago. When crafted into weapons and wielded properly, both of these substances are able of banishing a Fright. The Asteri spear became the symbol for the group, but it's also the symbol of the Royal Academy. It symbolizes what the Academy stands for on the front side of things, which means sharpening the mind and body to become better citizens of Getica. The third weapon that can banish a Fright is magic, and magic is a powerful force in the rest of the campaign world, usually, so spell-casting characters have a way of battling the Frights even without weapons. And while banishing Frights is an important task for all of the Guardians, learning about how to ward against them is just as important, or even more important. It's a big part of the mission. Frights may have other weaknesses that can be exploited by the people of the realm, even if they don't know that they're exploiting those weaknesses. So let's talk about the Frights and how the Guardians might banish or ward against them. As the DM or Game Master, Frights can be whatever you want them to be. They can take on whatever form you'd like. Make it easy for you to play these things. The great thing is you can reskin pretty much any monster or curse or even spell effect to be a Fright. My plan is to change the visual description of Frights to match the idea that they are formed from some mysterious energy instead of being flesh and blood. In other words, Frights take the form of whatever they think will cause the most fear in a particular area or situation, because they feed on that. I adjust the description to be the basic size and shape and form of the original monster, but I describe them as translucent, dark purple energy forms instead of flesh and blood type creatures. This does a couple of things for me. It allows for combat to minimize the bloodshed type of violence of battle. The players can dissipate and banish the Fright with their ironwood or their asteri spear or spellcasting. But what about when the player characters take damage? Well, remember in 5th edition, for example, hit points represent a combination of physical and mental durability. It doesn't always have to be a direct relationship between physical damage taken in battle, although it can be. But I like to think of the attacks as draining the PC's energy here. Any attack by a Fright reduces the hit points, just like in the normal rules, but you describe it as being weaker and feeling drained until, if you get to 0, you're still unconscious. And character death doesn't have to be character death. In the case of 5e, failing 3 death saves, for example, usually means the character dies. But for this setting, it means something different. It means when they regain consciousness, they can no longer see or remember the Frights. So they can keep their character, but they won't be able to play in that whole Guardians of Getica format anymore. They'll have to make a new one. Now, you don't have to do this at your table, but I like the flexibility here. You can run it however you like. I think it's a great way of making it kid appropriate, though. Oh, also, it's important to remember, only kids and elders can actually see the Frights. So the trick is you have to describe what's happening for the other people and what they might be seeing as everyone is battling a Fright. Like, what does it really look like to the outside? This will be situational and may require a little bit of thought ahead of time to pull it off correctly, but I think it makes it really interesting for the DM. Let me give you an example of a category of frights I'll be introducing to my players. So night frights, also known as creepies, come out on cloudy nights with no moonlight or starlight. And they could take the form of giant spiders or carrion crawlers or rust monsters or sturges in this example. Whatever you want though. So I might describe an attack by a night fright based on a sturge like this. As you look up and see 3 large purple glowing fluttering things in the sky, they seem to be moving toward the cattle in the field. And as they move closer to the ground, you get a better look and think that they may be bats or large purplish glowing bats, but that's weird. You also then see their faces. And they look like mosquitoes with something that looks like a large long needle where the nose would be. So, the players could attack with their ironwood or asteri weapons, or they could cast spells. Or they could try something else. Maybe they realized during their investigations that these creepy night frights only come out at night when there's no moon, no starlight, and they've been avoiding all of the torches in the area. Maybe someone remembered some lore associated with these frights.
Be wary of cloudy nights with no rain. It means a fright will visit again. Nights without stars or a shining moon will bring frights to visit sometime soon. No fear for those who can prepare. The frights are the ones who must beware. Make ready your torch, lantern, or candle. The light is more than the frights can handle.
Can you see how this might work out for a kids campaign? Both the kids and adults are playing the game, but there's also a built-in opportunity to write songs and poems or draw pictures or do anything else that might help build the lore of your campaign world. Even outside of the Guardians of Getika campaign, any of the stories or rhymes that they create, I can use in my other campaigns. Upper teens and adults won't remember any of it, but they'll still remember the songs. They won't remember what they mean, but they'll remember the songs. It enhances the richness of your campaign world. Think about our world. We might not know why all the traditions are what they are, although we have the internet and we can look stuff up these days. But think about how you, for example, might hear kids playing and singing Miss Mary Mac and clapping hands or jumping rope in our world. It can work for your campaign too. So this Guardians of Getika subsetting is a work in progress, obviously, and as I mentioned, I want it to be system agnostic in the end. But from a game mechanic perspective, I have to start somewhere, especially when using my own game, and I don't want to create a new game from scratch, so I'm going to be using a simplified rule set based on 5e D&D. I'm going to be leveraging the sidekick classes of Expert, Spellcaster, and Warrior as I work through the prototype of this subsetting. Doesn't mean they're going to end up in the final version of this or that you'll need them, I'm just using it for my game. I think they're a good starting place that allows for flexibility, and it's actually easy to move from a sidekick class into one of the standard D&D classes from there. Also, all the players and their characters are at the same level, and they advance at the same pace. This may seem counterintuitive because of kids and adults in the same adventuring group, but it's important to remember that even though the elders are older, they're just beginning to recollect what they forgot. So they're a little rusty when it comes to battling the frights, plus they're older, and they are just remembering about spreading the message, so starting them at the same level just makes sense. And in the end, it's important to emphasize that the kids playing the game should feel like the heroes. My Session 0 will also make this clear to the adults at the table. They'll have their chance in other games to be the shining stars. I have it set in my homebrew campaign world of Ventus, but you can use this in any setting you'd like. It could exist in the Forgotten Realms or Dragonlance, or even in Critical Role's campaign world of Exandria if they want. So, Mercer, check it out. These are just the early stages of development for this subsetting, but I'm playtesting and experimenting with everything as I go. In addition to the videos explaining my progress with this, I'll also be posting recordings of actual play sessions so you can see everything in action and how everything goes wrong in the face of kids playing the game. At some point in the future, after I've got things developed to a point where I can release this, I plan to put out a published version of this subsetting, hopefully. Like all things role-playing in D&D, if you like some of these ideas, adapt it, just take it and use it for your game. But be sure to let me know how it's working out so I can help improve my stuff too. Thanks for sticking with me to hear about my plans about the Guardians of Getika project. I feel like it's a good way of introducing kids to the game while still respecting the fact that they'll evolve as players as they mature. And I also hope it reflects a desire for some of us to get back to a simpler experience with the game that we love. With that, I'd like to leave you with a quote from the late, great Mr. Rogers. "Anyone who does anything to help a child is a hero to me." Cheers to that, Mr. Rogers.